Part 1. The Prophecy of 2025. If you have seen my previous video about a prophetic manga from Japan, then trust me, you will definitely want to stay tuned for this one. This time, we are diving into prophecy made by an American seer, and it is centered on the year 2025. But here's the chilling part. It is not just any prediction. This prophecy could shape the course of human history. What is this prophecy all about? Buckle up, because today's mystery will send a shiver down your spine. But before we dive in, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Who knows? It might just bring some luck your way. Have you ever thought about knowing your future? Imagine being able to see what is coming. But what if what you saw was something you could not avoid? Would you still want to know? It is a heavy question, right? And it is something Gene Dixon, a woman from the 1940s, grappled with throughout her life. Gene did not just predict the future. She lived it in a way no one could explain. Gene Dixon's story is not just one of incredible psychic abilities, but also a tale of how these powers intertwined with history. Born in the early 1900s, Gene became a key figure in the world of prophecy. Her life was marked by extraordinary predictions, many of which came true in ways that stunned even the most skeptical critics. In this video, we will explore her life, her uncanny accuracy, and how her prophecies, particularly those about the year 25, continue to haunt us to this day. Let us rewind to the early 1940s in America. There was this woman, Gene Dixon, and she had a bizarre, unexplainable gift. Gene could foresee events sometimes years into the future. She would know people's future jobs, relationships, and even when someone would pass away. Gene's gift became a symbol of clairvoyance and prophecy, gaining her national attention in the 20th century. It all started one fateful day, January 10th, 1942, when Gene Dixon had a strange encounter with a famous actress, Carole Lombard. Lombard was at the peak of her career when a middle-aged woman, Gene, approached her with a warning. Gene spoke urgently. In the next 6 months, do not fly by airplane. If you do, your life will be in danger. Carole, somewhat amused and a little dismissive, smiled and replied, I have got a flight in a few days, but do not worry, I will be fine. Just 6 days later, tragedy struck. Carole's plane crashed into a mountain due to pilot error, killing all 22 people on board, including her. Gene Dixon was not some eccentric, meddling stranger. She was one of the most influential psychics in American history, whose predictions were shockingly accurate. She had given Carole Lombard a warning, one that would prove to be all too real. But how did Gene get these insights? Was it a gift or a curse? The line between the two is often thin when it comes to those who can see the future. For Gene, this ability did not just manifest overnight. It began early in her life. Gene Dixon's story begins when she was just a child. Born in 1904 in the state of Wisconsin, Gene grew up in a traditional Catholic family. From a very young age, her parents began to notice something different about their youngest daughter. While other children her age were playing and imagining stories, Gene began to predict events with startling accuracy. Her visions were not just ordinary dreams, they were vivid glimpses into the future. One of the earliest instances of her ability occurred when Gene was just 5 years old. She repeatedly insisted that her mother give her an envelope with a black border, despite the fact that her mother had no idea what Gene was talking about. 10 days later, the family received a letter from a distant relative. It was a funeral announcement, and the envelope had a black border, just as Gene had described. That was the moment her parents realized their daughter had a rare gift. Gene's abilities did not stop there. At the age of 7, while her father was away on a business trip to Chicago, Gene turned to her mother with an exciting announcement. "Daddy's going to bring home a very big dog. It is black and white." Her mother laughed, thinking it was just a child's imagination. But a few days later, her father returned with a black and white dog exactly as Gene predicted. These early predictions were just the tip of the iceberg, as Gene would go on to make prophecies that would leave a mark on history. As Gene grew older, her abilities became more refined, and she began to make even bolder predictions. In 1911, her parents took her to meet an Egyptian palm reader in California, known for her expertise in reading fate through hands. This palm reader studied Gene's hands carefully, and then looked up with a deep, knowing expression. "Your daughter will be a great prophet, someone who can see across time." The palm reader handed Gene a small crystal ball and a piece of silk. As soon as Gene held the crystal ball, something strange happened. She stood still for a moment, then looked at the palm reader and softly said, "Be careful with the stove. You are about to get burned." A few days later, the woman suffered a kitchen accident just as Gene had foreseen. It was a simple warning, but it would prove to be another example of Gene's uncanny ability to predict future events. As she continued to grow, Gene's visions would become even more specific and detailed, guiding her family and friends through a world that seemed to bend to her foresight. Her talents did not go unnoticed. By the time Gene was in her 20s, word had spread about her unusual ability to see into the future. She was approached by people from all walks of life, seeking insight into their own futures. Some sought personal advice, while others were more interested in the bigger picture world events, global shifts, and the future of nations. Gene's fame as a psychic began to spread, but it was not until she made a chilling prediction about a well-known political figure that her notoriety reached new heights. In 1945, as World War II was winding down, Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, sought out Gene Dixon. Churchill was one of the most powerful political figures in the world at the time, and his position seemed unshakable. But he had a question for Gene. "Will I be re-elected?" Without hesitation, Gene answered, "You won tea." Churchill was stunned by her bluntness. At the time, no one could imagine a scenario in which Churchill did not win the election. His reputation and influence were immense. Yet, just a few months later, in a shocking turn of events, Churchill lost the election. His fate, as predicted by Gene, had come true. This event marked a turning point in Gene Dixon's career as a prophet. She was not just some curious woman issuing vague predictions. She was an undeniable force in the world of prophecy. But Gene's most chilling predictions were yet to come. In 1956, in an article for Parade magazine, Gene Dixon made a prophetic declaration about John F. Kennedy. At the time, Kennedy had not yet announced his candidacy for president, and his political career was still in its early stages. But Gene predicted that Kennedy would win the 1960 presidential election, but that he would be assassinated during his first term. Many dismissed this prediction, considering it little more than an eccentric woman's musings. Yet, by 1963, after Kennedy had become president, Gene's visions became even more vivid. She began to see a dark cloud hanging over the White House. Her visions grew more detailed as she foresaw a tragic event, a pair of black hands wiping the president's name off the plaque outside his office. In addition to this, Gene also saw a name, Lee Harvey Oswald. The name began with an O, followed by S, with the final letter shaped like a hook. On November 22, 1963, President Jeff Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The nation was in mourning, but what came next was even more chilling. The name of the man accused of the assassination flashed across the TV screen. Lee Harvey Oswald. The name matched Gene Dixon's prediction, down to the smallest detail. From that moment on, Gene Dixon became known as the Seer of Washington. She was not just some eccentric anymore. She had become a symbol of the supernatural and the unknown. Her predictions had become a part of history, and she was no longer just a woman issuing vague warnings. She was a woman who had predicted some of the most significant events in American and world history. As Gene's prophecies became more widely known, she continued to predict not only the rise and fall of political figures, but also events that would reshape the world. Among the most chilling of her predictions was her vision of 2025. According to Gene, 2025 would be a turning point for humanity, a time when the fate of the world would hang in the balance. In 1971, Gene published a book titled The Call to Glory. In it, she described a vision that spanned decades into the future. She saw a global crisis, one that was not like any that had come before. Gene saw a war, not a traditional war fought with bullets and bombs, but a war fought with disease. It would be a global conflict that would alter the course of history. And she saw it beginning in 2020, with the outbreak of a virus that would bring the world to a halt. By now, the eerie similarities between Gene Dixon's predictions and the global events of the last few years are impossible to ignore. The COVID-19 pandemic, which began in 2020, mirrors many aspects of the global conflict Gene had foreseen. But according to Gene, this was just the beginning. She saw 2025 as a critical moment, a time when humanity would face an even greater crisis. And as we approach that year, the question remains, what will 2025 bring? Part 2. The Prophecies of Gene Dixon. The story of Gene Dixon is far from finished. While many of her predictions have already come true, the most chilling ones are still looming on the horizon. The year 2025 is central to Gene's visions, a time that she repeatedly emphasized as a turning point for humankind. A bloody conflict would unfold, a global confrontation between major powers, and it would mark a decisive moment in world history. But first, let us take a step back and reflect on how Gene Dixon's gift evolved. Throughout her life, Gene was often confronted with the ethical dilemmas that came with her ability to see into the future. Would you want to know your fate if you knew it could be tragic? What if the very knowledge of your future could change the course of events or prevent something inevitable from happening? In 1944, Gene was invited to the White House, where President Franklin D. Roosevelt sought her counsel on something very personal. How much longer do I have in this role? Gene's response, no more than 6 months, was a prediction that would unfold with eerie precision. Just a few months later, Roosevelt passed away on April 12, 1945, the country grieving the loss of a leader who had guided them through one of the darkest times in modern history. For Gene Dixon, these experiences were nothing new. She had predicted Roosevelt's declining health years before it happened. In fact, she foresaw many major events that shocked the world: the end of World War II, the rise of new political powers, and the eventual shifts in the global order. But the true weight of Gene's gift came not in the specific events she foresaw, but in the larger picture of humanity's destiny. After Roosevelt's death, Gene's reputation grew. She became known not only for her accuracy, but also for the deep sense of responsibility that weighed on her. She understood that her gift was not about seeing the future, it was about helping to shape the future. And in the coming decades, Gene would see even greater challenges ahead. In the 1960s, the world found itself at the height of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a battle for global dominance, both militarily and ideologically. It was during this time that Gene Dixon made her most famous predictions, particularly regarding the fate of John F. Kennedy. In the same year that Kennedy became president, Gene predicted his assassination, something that shocked the nation in 1963, when the president was killed in Dallas, Texas. The country mourned, and the world was left wondering how such a tragic event could have been foretold. Gene's predictions had often been dismissed as eccentricities, but the assassination of Kennedy proved that her insights were more than just guesses. In a chilling twist, Gene had also predicted the name of the man who would assassinate the president. Lee Harvey Oswald. The very name. The O. This. The hook D. All of it was accurately described by Gene long before it became public knowledge. At that moment, Gene became more than just a psychic. She was seen as a prophetic figure, someone whose visions transcended the ordinary and reached into the very fabric of human history. But even with these extraordinary moments in her past, Gene's most terrifying predictions still lay ahead. As we approach the year 2025, her words ring in our ears, a warning that the future of the world is hanging by a thread. Gene Dixon's visions were not limited to political events. In fact, many of her predictions were about humanity itself, the struggles we would face, the wars that would be fought, and the choices we would have to make. One of the most disturbing aspects of Gene's foresight was her view of the year 2025 as a critical turning point. According to Gene, 2025 would not just be a year of political upheaval or economic instability, it would be a time when the very survival of the human race would be at risk. Her visions included the rise of new powers, the destruction of old alliances, and a global conflict that would change the course of history forever. What was it about 2025 that Gene saw so clearly? Why was this year so important in her vision of the future? Gene's predictions were often about balance, how nations, economies, and even individual lives must come into balance to survive. And the most profound imbalance that Gene saw coming was one between two major global powers, China and Russia. Gene's visions did not just suggest that these two nations would come into conflict, they predicted a war unlike any seen before. This would not be a conventional war fought with tanks, planes, and soldiers. It would be a war fought with something far more dangerous: disease. According to Gene, 2025 would mark the beginning of a conflict that would spread across the globe. A war of biological warfare, a battle for control of resources, and for dominance on the world stage. This war would not be fought on the terms of traditional diplomacy. It would be a fight for survival, a struggle to control the future of humanity itself. And in this conflict, China would emerge victorious. At the time when Gene made this prediction, the geopolitical landscape was entirely different. The Soviet Union still existed, and the Cold War was at its peak. But as we look at the present day, it is clear that some aspects of Gene's vision have already come to pass. The tension between China and the West, particularly the United States, has been escalating for years, particularly in trade, technology, and territorial disputes in the South China Sea. What if Gene says prophecy was not about a physical war, but a metaphorical one? What if this was a warning about the battle for global influence, resources, and technological superiority? We have seen this conflict unfold in front of our eyes, with economic wars over tariffs, cyber espionage, and the strategic importance of controlling critical technologies like 5G. But the true question remains, what happens next? Will the world truly be plunged into the kind of war that Gene foresaw? Or will we find another way to navigate the coming storm? Let us take a detour into the predictions of other prophetic figures who have warned about the year 2025. A Japanese manga artist named Tatsuki, in 1999, published a graphic novel titled The Future I Saw, which recorded 15 prophetic dreams. To this day, 14 of those dreams have come true. The last one, however, is yet to unfold, and it is centered on July 5th, 2025. According to Tatsuki's dream, a disaster even greater than Japan's 2011 earthquake will strike in the South China Sea. But this disaster won't be a simple natural event. It will be a cataclysmic occurrence that reshapes the very geography of the region. Tatsuki saw a new landmass rising from the ocean, connecting Japan with Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. Could this event be a literal manifestation of Gene Dixon's vision of 2025? Or is it a separate event entirely? What is even more unsettling is the fact that Tatsuki was not the only one who predicted something extraordinary happening in the South China Sea. In 2022, a man claiming to be a time traveler from the year 2062 appeared on an online forum. He had warned people to prepare for the disaster that would occur in the South China Sea long before the 2011 earthquake. In 2022, he returned with another warning. The South China Sea will not be calm. Prepare for something never before seen in July of 2025. Is this just coincidence? Or is there something more to these warnings? These prophecies point to a critical year for humanity, 2025. Whether it is the conflict between China and Russia, the South China Sea disaster, or the emergence of a new leader of compassion and unity, one thing is clear: the future is not set in stone. While we may not be able to change the course of history, we can prepare for the unknown. We can choose how we face the challenges ahead. And perhaps, just as Gene Dixon predicted, we can find a way to come together in the face of crisis. As the year 2025 looms on the horizon, we must ask ourselves, will we be ready? Or will we, like so many before us, ignore the warnings until it is too late? Part 3. The Unfolding Prophecies of 2025. As we continue to examine Gene Dixon's prophecies, it becomes increasingly clear that 2025 is not just a year of political or social upheaval. It is a year that could potentially reshape the entire structure of our world. The world Gene foresaw is one filled with chaos, conflict, and change, but also with the possibility of renewal, healing, and growth. Dixon's predictions about a global conflict, a war fought not with traditional weapons, but with disease, were made many decades ago. However, her visions of a pandemic-like crisis have already begun to resonate with what we witnessed in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic, though it may not have been the global war that Gene envisioned, certainly had a profound impact on the world, shutting down economies, bringing nations to a standstill, and killing millions. Was this the prelude to something even more catastrophic? Or was it simply the beginning of the cycle she described? Gene's visions were not limited to disease alone. She foresaw the shifting balance of global power and the rise of new nations and alliances. But what stands out most about her predictions is the way she described the inevitable rise of China, especially in relation to Russia. At the time when she made these prophecies, China was not the global superpower it is today. In fact, the country was still emerging from decades of isolation. However, as we approach 2025, China has become a central player in the world stage, not only economically but also politically and militarily. Gene's prophecy of a future conflict between China and Russia has led many to speculate on the nature of such a war. Will it be an actual military confrontation? Or is it a more metaphorical conflict, one that takes place in the economic, technological, or diplomatic arenas? The growing tensions between the US and China, particularly in trade and technology, could easily be seen as the precursor to such a struggle. Similarly, China's aggressive stance on territorial disputes, especially in the South China Sea, mirrors the kind of territorial ambitions that Gene foresaw as central to the conflict. Yet, as we analyze the events unfolding before our eyes, we must also acknowledge the possibility that Gene Dixon's prophecies may not have been entirely about the physical world. Her visions, while often deeply rooted in real-world politics, could also be interpreted as warnings about the soul of humanity, the collective spirit of mankind, and how we will choose to face the challenges ahead. A World on the Brink, 2025 and beyond. In her later years, Gene Dixon was often asked about the future of humanity. Her response, while cryptic, was laden with both caution and hope. She frequently spoke of the possibility of redemption, of a turning point where humanity could emerge from the turmoil stronger, wiser, and more united. Her predictions were not solely about disaster. She foresaw a world where love, compassion, and understanding could heal the rifts created by decades of war and division. In 2025, according to Dixon's vision, a leader of compassion would emerge, a figure capable of uniting the world and guiding it through the darkest of times. This leader would not be a traditional political figure or military commander, but someone who'd bridge the gap between nations and heal the wounds of a fractured world. In many ways, this leader would embody the very qualities that Dixon herself valued: wisdom, compassion, and a deep understanding of the human condition. Could this leader already be among us, or is this person still to come? The idea of such a figure is deeply compelling, especially as we look at the state of the world today. Could someone rise to meet the challenges of 2025 and beyond? If so, how will they do it? This question brings us to another part of Dixon's vision, a vision that centers on unity and healing in the face of global conflict. As much as her prophecies are about struggle and war, they are equally about redemption and growth. Gene believed that after the storm of 2025 passed, humanity would have the opportunity to rebuild not just the world, but ourselves. This was the essence of her prophecies, that even in the darkest of times, light could emerge. Even in the wake of disaster, humanity could find hope and healing. But there is a dark side to this vision as well. Gene Dixon often spoke about humanity's tendency to ignore the signs, to resist the warnings that were right in front of them. History, she believed, had shown time and time again that people often fail to heed the calls for change. Even when disaster is imminent, could we be repeating the same mistakes, ignoring the prophecies and the signs that have been laid before us? The prophecies of Tatsuki, the South China Sea and New Land, while Gene Dixon's predictions focused on the geopolitical shift between China and Russia. Another figure, the Japanese manga artist Tatsuki, also made a chilling prediction about 2025, Tatsuki's graphic novel, The Future I Saw, recorded 15 prophetic dreams, and one of them centers on the South China Sea. According to Tatsuki's dream, a new landmass would emerge in the South China Sea on July 5, 2025, connecting Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. This new land would change the region forever, altering the map of the world as we know it. While this vision may sound like science fiction, it is important to remember that Tatsuki's earlier predictions have been eerily accurate. Her foretelling of natural disasters, political events, and technological shifts have come to pass, making her visions worth considering. What does this dream mean for us? Could a new landmass really emerge in the South China Sea? Or is this a metaphor for a different kind of transformation as tensions rise in the region, especially over territorial disputes? It is possible that Tatsuki's vision may be a warning of the forces at play beneath the surface, forces that could, quite literally, reshape the world. In addition to Tatsuki's dreams, the time traveler from the year 2062 has also warned of something unprecedented occurring in the South China Sea. His warnings, posted online before the 2011 earthquake, urged people to move to higher ground. In 2022, he has returned with a chilling message about 2025. According to him, the South China Sea will not be calm, and something never before seen will occur in the region in July of 2025. Preparing for the unknown, the future we can shape. As we draw closer to 2025, it is hard not to feel a sense of anticipation, even anxiety. The prophecies of Gene Dixon, Tatsuki, and other figures seem to be pointing to a pivotal year, one that could change the course of history. Whether it is the geopolitical struggle between China and Russia, the rising tensions in the South China Sea, or the potential emergence of a new world leader, one thing is certain: the future is not as fixed as we might like to believe. Gene Dixon's life and work serve as a reminder that the future is always in motion, always subject to change. While we may not be able to stop the challenges ahead, we can choose how we face them. The choice is ours. We can succumb to fear, or we can rise to the occasion and work toward a brighter, more unified future. One of the greatest challenges facing humanity today is the question of unity. In a world where divisions seem to grow wider by the day, where conflict and competition seem to dominate the political landscape, how can we come together to face the challenges of 2025 and beyond? The prophecies tell us that we must find a way to heal the wounds of the past, to move beyond the divisions that have torn us apart, and to embrace the possibility of a better future. Gene Dixon believed that humanity had the potential to overcome any obstacle, but only if we learned to come together. In 2025, the choice will be ours. Will we continue down the path of division and conflict, or will we take the opportunity to unite and build something better? Conclusion. The road ahead. 2025 is approaching, and with it comes uncertainty, fear, and possibility. The prophecies of Gene Dixon, Tatsuki, and others offer a glimpse into what could be, but they also leave us with choices. We have the power to shape the future, to prepare for the unknown, and to create a world that reflects the best of what we are as a species. As we move closer to this pivotal year, we must ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in? The future is not set in stone, and while we cannot control everything, we can control how we respond. More than ever, we must be ready to face whatever comes our way together.